Really excited. I have a really smart, amazing guest. His name is Mark Ennis, and Mark is one of the owners of the Neilan Funeral Home, and they have two locations. One is in New London and one is in Niantic, East Lyme, Niantic. And I had the pleasure of actually working with Karen McLaughlin, who is a Neilan, before she married her husband, and was such an amazing person, such an amazing family. But I'm to the point in my life where I'm thinking about, I want to make things nice and easy for my kids, and so I went and met with you, Mark, the other day. So thank you so much for coming.
You're very well. Thank you for having me.
And agreeing to share a little bit of your story of why it's important and how you got started. So we're going to talk about where you work, who you work with, what you do, how you do it, and why it's important. First of all, I think it's really important that we think about it and talk about it and normalize the conversations about it. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. The more your family knows your wishes, it's going to be totally easier for them dealing with the grief and making sure that your wishes are taken care of.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many options, right? You know, if you have on your driver's license the card that says you want your organs to be donated, you know, that's already there and that's in place. But
Correct.
then you can go in and basically say what you want as far as, tell me what it looks like. You
Sure.
tell me.
Okay. So a family can come in and whether it's a family member or themselves and say, these are my wishes. I want to be cremated. I want to be buried. I want to have a mass. I want to have a celebration of life. And we would help them through that process and kind of feel out what they're looking at.
Okay.
And
So the options are unlimited.
unlimited.
Options are unlimited. And then the other thing is that if you are describing or saying that you want to have like a religious service, a mass or whatever, you can actually pick the readings and what you want
Absolutely.
and the music and like and if all of that's in place, and you would keep a file basically, you would hold that.
Yep.
Yeah. No,
So the churches generally give us a booklet that you go through, and
Okay.
you can, you know, it even asks if you want someone to do that reading, if you have a friend or a grandchild or a brother or sister, and you can line all those things up, and it goes in the file. So when that time comes, we open the file and say, oh, this is what mom, dad, grandma, grandpa wanted. Here it is. The readings are picked, cemetery is selected, casket, vault, urn, it's all there.
Well, and I know, I'm sure you have some interesting stories, but I think everybody does, and that's what the name of my show, Stories Worth Telling. And I'm sure on your work that you've seen where some people are like, I don't want to talk about it,
Absolutely.
and then after the parent passes away, and especially if there's a number of siblings, the kids are like, Mom, I don't want mom's, you know, to be buried without a bottom to her casket, or
Yep.
what?
Yep.
How,
So a lot of times families come in and they've never had the discussion. They'll say, well, we did this for grandma, so maybe mom did that. She picked out what we did for grandma. I guess we'll do it for her. But that conversation had never happened. So they're kind of stuck.
so
right?
you would really encourage, just say, hey, what do you want to wear? What do you want to look like? What do you want to do? Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Where do you want your service?
Where do you want your service?
Do you want it in your backyard? Do you want it at a restaurant? Do you want it in a church? You know, you can be as creative and expressive as you want, or you can be as traditional as, for instance, a Catholic Church.
Okay.
The Mass is the Mass. It's, you know, it's pretty standard.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of friends who have lost their husbands. Is that an okay expression in your
Sure.
opinion? Lost?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Their husbands passed away. And the husband said they didn't want a service. They didn't want a celebration of life. And my opinion about that is that it's probably better to have a celebration of life. It helps everybody to come together and to go through the process of saying their last thoughts and ideas.
Absolutely.
And if you don't do that, what happens? What do you think?
Well, from my experience, the process continues. You could be in Stop and Shop or at Dunkin' Donuts, and you didn't have anything. You didn't have any type of service where people can gather and express their feelings.
Their sympathies, right?
So you're constantly hearing that. You're constantly, it could be 3 months, 6 months later, they went online and they found the obituary, oh my God. And then they see you and they're like constantly, and I think it doesn't allow the person to have an ending, and maybe that's a harsh word, ending, but it's kind of like closure is a great word.
Some celebration, basically, it's a celebration.
Right. So it kind of keeps that process going, and not that it ever stops, but being constantly reminded of it, I think, is difficult. We take, I say this, we take instruction very well. You tell us what your ideas are, we'll tell you if we can do them, and kind of guide you in a way that says, well, that's a great idea, but here's another option. Maybe they haven't thought of that option. We're all getting together around, my family's coming into town around Memorial Day.
Sure.
Okay. Why don't you plan it for then? Because everybody's going to be here.
For the celebration of life you're talking about. Yeah. So
or even a gathering, right?
yeah.
Even a gathering at the funeral home. Hey, get everybody together. Everybody can come here. We can have a specific clergy or a family member speak. And again, I think it adds that closure part of it and gives people the opportunity to grieve.
And you need to grieve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an important part of life.
So you got your degree. You were from Derby, Connecticut.
Derby, Connecticut, yes.
And Derby is famous, right?
Smallest city in Connecticut, yes.
Okay, so the smallest city of Connecticut, and now you're in East Lyme. But you went to East Greenbush outside of Albany.
Correct.
And that's kind of where you got your start.
Yes. My uncle owned a small funeral home in East Greenbush. We were fortunate enough growing up in Derby, we would summer there. They had a small farm, and we go up and bale hay and muck stalls and
do what kids do on the farm, right? Horses
absolutely.
And feed the chickens.
Yeah. A lot different from what we were used to in Derby. And my uncle was a funeral director, and he had at that time, a very unique business. He had what he called an air hearse.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, so he was a pilot.
Okay.
He had a small plane. Someone passed away in
interesting.
Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
He would fly into the local airport. The local funeral director would meet him. They would load the person into the plane, and then he would fly them to whether it was Lake George area or anywhere in upstate New York.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So that's really a niche industry,
Yes.
wasn't it? So you got your associate degree in mortuary science, is that
Correct.
what you call it?
From Hudson Valley Community College in Troy, New York.
Okay, and it sounds like there's a lot of science, a lot of biology. Why is that so important? Why do you need that information?
Well, biology, anatomy, we're doing things with the embalming process.
Do you actually do that at the funeral home?
Yes.
Actually do the embalming?
Yes.
And what does that entail? I don't really know.
So embalming is preservation.
Okay.
It's also disinfection.
Okay.
So if there is going to be a long delay between the time someone passes to the time the funeral is being held, or if there's going to be any type of formal viewing, traditionally, many years ago, there would be 2 nights of calling hours. It's a way to preserve the body. So when someone passes, decomposition starts automatically.
Right.
So what we do is we slow that process down.
Okay. Chemically, through some kind of
We use it-
injection, and
correct.
then maybe some topical kinds of things as well?
They're both.
Okay.
We can use arterial injection, but there are also creams and liquids that we can use to either help us or if the arterial part of the embalming process doesn't work well, it kind of balances that out a little bit.
See, and I would think that that work that you do is just so sacred too, and respecting that body and respecting that person's life, and just doing the best to embalm that person and preserve it for the viewing purposes of the
For
family.
the family, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's your why, I would guess,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And it's to help that grieving process. It's to, again, in today's world, most families are scattered. Brothers, sisters live in California,
Sure.
all over the country. They may not have been there at the time when mom or dad passed. They want to say their final goodbyes.
Do you think it's important to see the body?
Well, I do, but that doesn't seem to be today's trend.
Oh, really?
Today's trend is mostly, it's more financially driven,
Oh, interesting.
and which is fine.
No, I'm just saying, yeah.
But yeah, I think people have come to the point where I want to remember Grandma the way she was. The last time I saw her sitting at the kitchen table having a cup of tea, or watching a ball game or something like that. Right? That's how they internalize remembering her. They don't want to remember her, in a casket or in an urn, or they want pictures and things of that nature.
So let's talk about urns for a second.
Sure.
Because when I was at your funeral home the other day, I was really impressed. There was a beautiful mantel clock that had the Westminster chime, and it sat about this big, right, 12-inch square, and about 12 inches high. And you said that's an urn.
Correct.
I always thought urns were, I don't know what I thought they were, but yeah.
An urn is any vessel that holds ashes.
Okay,
It
by
does not-
definition,
by-
there you go.
Does not have to be anything that we've had families make their own urns.
Okay.
You can purchase an urn via the internet. You type in cremation urn and you'll get a million different hits. They're made from many different materials. They're shaped in toolboxes, motorcycle gas tanks,
Wow.
cowboy
so
boots.
If you're like a motorcycle, like Harley Davidson guy, then
You can type in motorcycle or Harley Davidson urn, and
There you
you'll
go.
get a million hits.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it's more of the personal thing. It depends on what you're doing with the
And how much
ashes.
volume do you need? Basically, it
That
depends
depends.
on the size of the person. If
Correct.
it's a great 6'5", 300-pound guy, bigger bones, bigger body.
Bigger bone mass, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
That'll depend. But most of the urns, standard size urns, have the capacity for one person. They do make double urns
Okay.
that husband and wife can go in.
that's nice.
They're obviously a little bit larger.
Sure.
You may be restricted on what type of material those are made from.
That's interesting. Now, you were saying that each state is different. Talk about that to me.
So we were having a discussion about licensing. So
Okay.
in the state of Connecticut, you have to have an associate's degree. When you graduate, you have to take what's called a national board. So it's a culmination of everything that you learned in school. You pass the national boards, then you have to do an apprenticeship in the state that you want to become licensed in. So Connecticut, you have a 1-year apprenticeship. So basically a funeral home takes you in, gives you a place to work, teaches you how to be around families, because that is generally not what you're learning in school.
Sure.
How
Because
to
in school, you're learning more the
book work.
funeral service, accounting, science. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you're not having that interaction.
Okay.
And that's very important. You want to make sure that you're listening to them, you're understanding what they're saying. You want to help them any way you can. As again, that's a great idea, but here's other options if you want them. If you don't, that's great. We'll do whatever you want.
Well, I would think you need to be very skilled in having what I would call very possibly difficult conversations.
At times, yes, there are very, very difficult times. It's a very emotional time.
Well, especially after the person's passed, the person, and if you're preparing, like, say if I lost my husband and I came in, I'd be in shock. I'd be
Right.
like, am I thinking right? I'd want
Correct.
to have somebody come with me. I wouldn't want to
Correct.
do it. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. I always say, the more ears, the better, right? Because I may tell them that I'm going to do X, and that just, they're zoned out at that point, right after. But somebody else will say, oh, well, Mark said he was going to contact the church, so we don't have to do that.
Nice, nice.
So that's always a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. And then you said, let's see, so you became a licensed funeral director. Now, we talked the other day about humor, having a little bit of a sense of humor. Why do you think that's important in your work?
I think it shows people that that you're human.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And I think that's important to let them know that I may not have experienced what they're going through.
Right.
I may have, but again, it kind of makes the conversation go a little easier, I think.
Well, it's a little bit of levity too, and I think it kind of it gets you so you're kind of feeling the same. You're at the same wavelength, rather than somebody being completely distraught, and then the other person, if you can laugh about it a little bit. And I always think, what would that person want? Like, if somebody is leaving us, and if you have a loved one who leaves us, and the clock is ticking for all of us, right? So when somebody leaves us, what would they want for us? They wouldn't want us curled up in a ball in the corner.
No.
Nobody would.
No.
No. If they love you, they want you to continue to have joy, to be hopeful, to be productive, right? To do all those things.
Correct.
So helping to do that, I think, is part of what you do as well.
Yeah, and we have to, again, you have to kind of read the room a little bit, right? If you don't want to overstep your bounds, you don't want to. Many times, families will, say to us, I really don't want to be here.
Right.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to call us.
Right. No.
I mean, when our phone rings, it's not like they're calling, to tell us something happy has happened.
Right. Unless the person's been suffering. I mean, I think a lot of times we have to reframe how we look at death too. And if you believe in afterlife, then that person is moving on into their next world or existence.
And
right?
sometimes we get very, families seem to, in a way, become selfish, right? Grandma has passed, she's in a better place, but she was my grandma. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, so after a while, they seem to realize that, she's not suffering in a nursing home, or she's not suffering at home, and she's in a better place. And I think that brings comfort to them as well.
Now, you have a couple of attorneys that you work with that help you as far as, because there's some legal things that people have to go through, right, with the wills and the...
Right. I am not an attorney.
No.
I instruct people to, if they're coming into pre-plan, usually that's the second step. The first step is, making sure you have your wills in place, your power of attorney in place, your health proxy in place, and have those discussions with your family.
Those are really three important things. Maybe we should repeat them. Your will, your health proxy, and your power of attorney.
Have those in place.
And then also, I think having those documents in a place where people know where they are, and then having all of your financials kind of all tidy, right? And knowing where things are and where they should be.
It certainly helps at the time when someone passes. Absolutely. Many times families, they throw their hands up and say, don't know.
Right.
Don't know. Don't know what grandma had.
Right.
I never had that conversation.
Right. And to me, that would be like a double tragedy.
It is.
Yeah.
Because then at the end of the process, it just takes that much more time, that much more assistance from other entities, whether it's an attorney, probate court, things of that nature.
Oh, yeah.
So having all that stuff, and again, it's sharing that. You can certainly have it, but if it's in your safety deposit box or it's in your strong box.
And nobody knows. Doesn't do anybody any
It
good.
does nobody any
Share
good.
the information.
Share the information.
Okay, that's really important. And you said something the other day, and you said something about cremation. You said cremation is the final, what was the word that you said? Do you remember?
Oh, that was with the ashes. So
Okay.
cremation is, Connecticut considers cremation the final disposition.
Disposition is the
Correct.
word, the final
So,
disposition. What does that mean?
So when someone is cremated, the ashes are returned to the funeral home. You can do whatever you want with those. If you want to inter them in a cemetery or a mausoleum, you want to put them in an urn and leave them at home. There are no rules or regulations that says you can't do that.
Okay.
So Connecticut considers that once the cremation takes place, it's family choice.
Okay.
They can do whatever they want.
Okay.
There are cemetery regulations that says, if you have cemetery space, how many sets of cremains can go on a lot, but those differ. But Connecticut considers the cremation process final disposition, just like it would burial.
Okay.
So if someone is buried at Cedar Grove Cemetery or St. Mary's Cemetery, once they're buried, that's their final disposition.
That's good to know. That's really good to know.
Yep.
And I feel like I've had a peace of mind after having met with you a week or so ago, whenever that was, and just getting an idea of what we needed to do. And I think it was a little bit upsetting for my kids. My daughter was kind of like, "Oh, that's kind of nice of you guys," talking about to me and my husband. And then I think my son had a little bit more of a difficult time with it. And I think that reaction is perfectly normal.
Absolutely.
Both of them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And not like I'm planning anything, but I want to do what's good for them and make
Sometimes they don't see that.
right.
They don't see that as, oh, that's going to benefit me down the road, or I'm
Right.
not going to have to make these decisions.
Right.
Whether I'm going to make the right decisions, whether they think they're right or wrong, there's really no wrong decision, right? But sometimes that's very difficult on families.
Well, and just the judgment, I think, or the conflict that might occur between the siblings if you have larger families, and what would go on with some of that. Yeah.
That's always a challenge.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own views and their own thought processes around what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. So we have to kind of work around that sometimes and corral them in.
Pulling back to the pre-planning them, I would think would be preemptive of some of those problems, but I'm sure that there's something that's always going to come up.
Absolutely. It's a starting point.
Yeah.
It's a template that this is what the person wants. They don't necessarily have to agree or disagree. Most times they're like, well, if that's what mom wanted, that's what we're going to do.
Perfect. Perfect.
But they may have their own little add-on
That's
or
fine.
niche.
Yeah,
That's
let's
great.
do this.
A little personalization. That's great.
Yeah, okay. We've covered a lot, and I think that you've been very informative, and I'm
great.
just wondering, what are some things that maybe you want to share that I haven't brought up, anything that I've neglected to bring up? I think you've been very insightful. I felt so much smarter after meeting with you, and I think,
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's what we need to do.
So I think the pre-planning is important, especially if a family member's going on Title 19 or is, going to be in long-term care.
Okay.
It's important.
Title 19 is disability, right?
Title 19 is the state of a program that the state of Connecticut has to pay for long-term care.
Okay.
So there's many, many different procedures and rules and regs that the state has to allow a person to have that program, go on that program. And one of them is that they highly recommend that you go to a funeral home and set up your funeral arrangements and pay for them.
Oh, nice.
Because the state of Connecticut is not in the business of paying for people's funerals.
Well, and you don't want to leave that burden to your family either. Like I don't know what an average funeral might cost, but a couple $1,000s or whatever.
It depends on what type of service you're having.
Right, and you'd like to prepay that if possible.
Right, so that the state basically asks the families to go and prepay for that. So when that person passes, that they're not expending funds to pay for that person's funeral.
Right.
And there's rules and regulations, and that's important. We use a a trust program where the money belongs to the person. So
Oh, nice.
Mrs. Smith comes in and prepays her funeral, gives us X amount of dollars. It is still her money. She decides to move to Florida, she still has her trust.
And then is it interest bearing?
It is interest bearing.
Okay.
And that generally, when you go to a funeral home and sign up with a funeral home, they itemize all the charges for you. And that interest goes to pay any price increase. So, and I can't speak for other funeral homes, we guarantee those costs. So if it's a $5,000 funeral, we guarantee those costs, and we're hoping that the interest pays for any price increase.
Nice.
Now, if they decide that they want, a parade and want floats, well, that's not part of our contract, so those are additional costs. Or they want to go to a church or a different cemetery, we would have to figure those out. But it is a benefit to the families if they feel that they are comfortable with their funeral choices. And then if that changes, those funds could be allocated really to any part of that person's funeral. Again, if they decide, well, nobody wants to go to church anymore, or she doesn't want to be buried, she wants to be cremated, okay, that's fine. We can allocate those funds to basically take care of those costs.
Okay, so however they want, like whatever, like their dinner at the restaurant to celebrate the life, whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
And that's very important. You should talk to your attorney about that too when you're going into. There's a lot of elder care attorneys that will instruct you. Okay, because there's a spend down process for the state of Connecticut. You can only have so many assets, so they don't want you to have a lot of money in a nursing home if you're on that program.
Right.
So the attorney will instruct you, as well as the nursing facility, and most likely a social worker who works with the state to go and do that. And that's very important to do. You want to protect that money as much. And again, it's the person's money. They move to Florida, a child lives in Florida, and they're bringing mom to Florida. They can take that trust paperwork to any funeral home and say, I have a trust with the company here, and they're able to access those funds as well as we are.
What happens if you die in a different state? If you're traveling on vacation, if I go to Brazil this summer and slip off of a...
That could be a little tricky, especially international travel.
Okay.
If it's domestic travel, we have funeral homes that we deal with that we can actually bring that person back.
Okay.
Internationals is a little more challenging because you've got consulates and you've got,
Oh boy.
if you're in
But
Brazil.
you've done it all, I guess,
we
right?
have.
You've done it all.
Brought people back or sent people there. Yes, it
Well,
gets challenging. We, to be honest, we have a company that we deal with in New York that's all they do.
Really?
Is international travel for deceased.
Well, and a lot of people, once they hit 80, and if they're still healthy, they like to travel. Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah.
That's, but yeah, a lot of times it may delay the process a little bit, but it's not as challenging as you think.
You're not escaping.
International is very challenging. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yep.
Well, Mark, is there anything else? And what did we miss?
I don't think we've missed anything.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Again, we'd love to have you as a guest.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.
This
is a little out of my comfort zone, but I enjoyed it very much.
No, you were great. Well, yeah, I don't think anybody's completely comfortable with the topic or conversation or being televised while you're talking about it.
Sure.
So, but it's
It was
all
great.
good. Yeah.
Thank you.
you.